So, the path of bhakti, and my hope is that I would like to speak specifically about, there is a section called the Navadha Bhakti, which occurs in the Bhagavata. But what we'll do today is a more um, a general exchange of thoughts and ideas on bhakti itself. And then maybe tomorrow we can look more closely at this 9 types of devotion. Now, about bhakti is not a new subject. I imagine almost all of us here see ourselves as devotees. And so it's not that what I'm going to say is something very spectacularly novel or something which you may never have heard before. So don't raise your expectations too high. But there is benefit in also going through ideas and subjects which we have known, but kind of revisiting some of the things that we know to see. And sometimes when we look back at some of the, even sometimes you reread a book that you have read before, we might discover things in it we may not have noticed during the first reading. So Patha Bhakti is like that, that devotion, love for God does have a presence in our life in one form or another. But it's good to revisit that and try to see whether we find any new light in what's going on in our own connection, in our own relationship with the spiritual ideal. One of the questions about bhakti, and bhakti is, of course, our love for God and God's love for us. So when we speak about love, and so one of the things that we can ask ourselves is, given a choice, what would we prefer more? To be loved by others or to be known by others? Or what is of greater importance to me? To love other people or to know other people? There's a way to kind of see what role knowledge and love play in our lives. And clearly, there are going to be a variety of answers to that. Some people might say, knowing is more important to me than love. Some others might say, loving is more important to me. And some others might say, well, I don't care either way. Some might say, why can't we have both? So you find a variety of answers. So similarly, a question can be asked, what do I value more? Knowing about God or loving God? Do I want to be known by God or do I want God to love me? Again, we might find an equally variety of answers to this question as well. And so in general, we can say that when there is a primacy of knowledge, wanting to know, and the desire to be known, by and large, broad category that is kind of pushed under like a path of knowledge, path of a philosophical inquiry. And the other path, where the primacy of love, to discover God's love for us and our love for God. And so this is then generally put under the broad umbrella, broad category of the path of love, the path of bhakti. These are kind of broad categorizations. So if bhakti is love for God and God's love for us, so there are these two terms which are very important. One is love, and the other is God. And so if we try to think about and ask a question like, well, what is love? Because there is so much talk of love, we kind of instinctively feel it, experience it in some way in our lives. But if we ask to define what love is, that may not be so easy to put. Sometimes there are things we experience, the moment we are asked to put it into words, it becomes very difficult. So, is love a feeling? And the answer is no. Sure, I mean, love can express itself through our feelings, but is love itself a feeling? The problem with feeling is that we know from our lives, there are times when we feel very emotional, our feelings are very high. There are times when we feel dry, we feel the feeling, we don't feel much. And so feelings have their ups and downs. Now, sometimes when we mistake love for a feeling, and that's how oftentimes people use the term love. And that's why people fall in love and fall out of love. It's like feeling, just feel something and then you don't feel that thing anymore. And of course, I mean, the way language develops, why do people speak about falling in love? Why fall? We know that falling is not a very good experience. It's you just get, I mean, you get injured, you get hurt. And so sometimes they have said that we don't fall in love with God, we rise in love with God. I mean, that would be one way to kind of distinguish it from other loves. So love is not a feeling because feelings come and go. Love has a constancy about it. Love is stable. It's not something that can be switched on and off. The other thing would be the other faculty that our mind has is knowledge, cognition. Is love a form of knowledge? And an argument can be made that it is a kind of knowledge. When we love somebody, love something, we get to know more about that person, more about that thing. On the other hand, we know that love also creates kind of blind spots. You know, even when you are driving, there are all these rear view mirrors, etc. But there is still a blind spot. You have to kind of at least nowadays, because all the lights and sensors, etc., you probably don't have to turn back and look at it. But in the olden times, There used to be a blind spot. And so sometimes love can create blind spots. And so we may not know, because sometimes we see in life people who feel they have known each other for a long time, love each other, and suddenly get shocked after a few months, sometimes after a few years. Like, oh, I didn't know you were like this. And so love cannot be full of knowledge because there are still things we don't know. And so love, again, can lead to knowledge, can be expressed in the form of knowledge, but love itself is different from knowledge. Similarly, we could say, is love a form of willpower? And we could say, sure, uh, the experience of love does bring a tremendous amount of strength, and the people have done great things or even terrible things, all out of love. So love does get manifest either as a feeling or as knowledge or even as the force of will. But love itself cannot be identified with any of these, the three primary ways the mind manifests. So one way of, if we must define love, then one way would be to say that love is a kind of a mysterious force. It's mysterious because we cannot pin it down, whether it is this or this or this. But it is a mysterious force that tends towards unity, tends towards bringing everything together. So anything that brings things which seem apart together, or people apart together, that would be a manifestation of love. And we know that even inside, we have these disparate parts of our own personality, whether it's body, mind. The mind itself is divided into the unconscious, the conscious, and then, of course, there is a separation of me from God. So there are all these things which seem to have gotten or kind of, at least seem to have been broken into pieces. So love would be one mysterious force, because we can't exactly pin it down what it is, but which will bring all of these together. So this is kind of a general brainstorming, if you like, it's kind of what love could mean. And clearly, there are books have been written, poems, and I mean there is so much has been written about it. But this is just some of the thoughts regarding love that come to mind. The second word is God. Now, God is a word in the English language, and none of the scriptures of any of these major world religions which have been around, none of these original scriptures are in English, really. And so clearly, there is something in each of these traditions which have now gets translated as God in English. And as we know, there is something is always lost in translation and something is gained. So the word God is a very generic term. We have a very general understanding of what we are talking about, but we try to dig deeper, then lots of questions arise. Now, in the Hindu texts themselves, they have tried to understand the phenomenon in many different ways. There is, first of all, the question whether God is a person or God is something or someone who is beyond personality. And so in Sanskrit, they use the word saguna and nirguna. Saguna, guna is an attribute, quality. Normally, if someone has a personality, is a person, we are able to attribute some quality to the person. So a personality often definitely involves some attributes, some qualities. Sometimes can include also a form. And so does God have a form? Does God have any qualities? Or is God formless? And we find throughout religious literature, throughout history, um, all of these possibilities and combinations that get expressed. God is seen as a person, and that's kind of almost instinctive. The biblical idea of God, because of the dominance of Western way of thinking, is kind of percolated. It's almost become a global thing now, and therefore, even people who themselves may not see themselves from a Abrahamic tradition or not identify themselves as Westerners, but because of the ideas that have spread through Hollywood movies or novels and all kinds of things, in a very indirect way, almost unbeknownst to us, certain ideas enter and they get internalized. And so it's very not unusual to find to go in any part of the world and people who may identify in many different ways about their religious uh, identity. You will find a kind of an idea, everyone kind of agree, those who believe in God, that God is loving, God is kind, uh, God is great, the source from which everything has come, and God loves us. God stands for justice, and sometimes that God of justice can be a little terrifying if you are on the wrong side of the fence. It's like, oh, so God is going to judge me. He is the supreme judge. And so there are all these different qualities we attribute to God. It's also possible, as I said, if there's a personality, to think in terms of forms. And Hindus have been very active in this because they gave a lot of freedom uh, to say, how do you think about God? They didn't kind of lay down, there was not the top-down approach to say, this is who God is, this is how you think about it. But they just, how do you think about it? And then clearly, mm, um, our minds think in different ways. So there have been people who like to think of God as a person. And to some, again, when you think of a person with form, then of course the gender comes in, and then lots of stories come in. It's like, where was this deity born, and who are a part of his family? And so all the mythology that gets developed between the different devas and devis, the gods and goddesses. Well, I'm referring to them as gods and goddesses. Again, it's a word God. God doesn't appear as a word in any Hindu scripture. And so what is it in the Hindu texts that gets translated into English as God itself become problem, because the word, as I said in the beginning, the same word God is used. So there's a biblical idea of God, and then there is this Hindu God. But what are the different words and the theological nuances in their scriptures? They all kind of get um, uh, whitewashed, like so to speak, and just everything goes like just one God. Anyway, so in the Hindu tradition, but not only in Hindu tradition, even many Buddhists, there are the Tibetan, if you have seen, they have a large variety of deities. So in Buddhism also has different forms of Buddhism have these different deities. So a human mind has been allowed in some places to visualize and think of the divine in a way. And so they have thought these of the different forms. And then there is this other idea that God has qualities, but no form. So God is loving and kind, but God is not a person in the sense who has a form. And then there is the other idea that the reality of God is beyond form, beyond qualities. So there are all these different ways God has been thought of. If you look at the Vedantic texts also clearly, well, Vedanta itself is such a generic term. We can either restrict it to only what the Upanishads say, or Vedanta can in general mean, can include all these other texts which came later on. So that's how generally, I mean, that's a big subject and we won't go into that now. That when we speak about the Vedanta society or when we speak about Vedanta, what Vedanta are we referring to? Because sometimes the word gets used in a very broad sense. I mean, essentially the word Vedanta, it will mean Veda, Anta. Anta is the end or the essence. So the essence of knowledge or the essence of the Vedas. And the Upanishads are that section of the Vedas which predominantly contain the philosophical foundation of the whole Vedic wisdom. And so Vedanta can literally, as a text, refer to Upanishads. Sometimes Vedanta can also refer to, and that's definitely how Swami Vivekananda uses it, to just the Hindu tradition, because the word Hindu does not occur in any Hindu scripture. Again, and so like many things, it's a kind of a nomenclature that had developed not indigenously, but by others who called it that way. And so Vedanta can, as Swami Vivekananda did, kind of refer to the whole tradition itself. But if you go even further and then say Veda can refer to this, Vedas, the revealed texts of the Hindus. But Veda also means, and Swami Vivekananda actually defined it that way in the Parliament of Religions in Chicago when he spoke for the first time in the West. He said, by Vedas, no books are meant. That by Vedas are meant that spiritual laws discovered by these ancient sages. And these laws are not bound by any geographical area, not bound by space and time and anything. In that sense, Veda really means the essence of wisdom itself, irrespective of, so anything that is true, anything that is real, which is not limited in any way, would be Veda. So in a broadest sense, it would include even the wisdom of the Bible, the Quran, and all of these texts. So looking upon Vedanta then as the essence of spiritual knowledge itself, irrespective of which, where, and when this knowledge was revealed, then Vedanta really means it's just broad. It's not limited by anything. And so really, I'll keep on using the word Vedanta, and you try to figure out in what sense I'm using it. But it's good to know that the same word kind of has these different levels of expression and understanding. In the Brahma Sutras, which is one of the foundational texts of Vedanta, this ultimate reality just referred to simply as that from which this whole thing has appeared, into which it rests, and unto which it finally returns. So the source from which it comes, where it finds support, and where it is finally absorbed. Now, in mythological terms, they use the term Srishti, Sthiti, Pralaya, and that's how the Hindu form of Trinity, if you like, gets worshipped. So Brahma is seen as the source, that aspect of the divine from which this world in which we live and move, all of this visible universe has come. Vishnu, who is seen as that aspect of the divine which sustains and preserves and protects and takes care of this creation. And Shiva is considered that aspect of the divine unto which it all gets finally absorbed in. So that's one way to think about it. Now we could go into how this Srishti has come, and very quickly, one of the ways how the world has come. Clearly, in the Hindu text, there is no reference to world coming in 7 days, or there is neither a Big Bang and all of that. So that could be one question. How did this world come? How long did it take? Again, many answers are possible. once Holy Mother, Sharda Devi, was asked, and it's amazing if you read the conversations, the kind of questions people asked her, and the answers she gave, and some of them are, which seemed like pretty silly questions, and some of them were very profound questions. And then Mother's answers, and it's kind of fascinating because sometimes we find someone asking a pretty silly question. It's like, Mother, is it like this? And then Mother says, yes, it's like that. And then that same person then says, like arguing, no, but I don't think it's like that. It's something else. And then Mother says, okay, it's something else. In other words, when Mother is agreeing for A, B, C, all possibilities, that means it's not really important, you know. But there are certain times she is very clear, very emphatic. And so, anyway, among those questions, when somebody asked Holy Mother, said, Mother, did this whole creation come at once or did it come in stages? Now, clearly, even through the theory of evolution, you got all these Big Bang and blah, 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 slowly from the subtle to this thing and so on. And then, of course, there are these theological ways of showing how, I mean, how much time and how God created all this. And so Mother's answer was, no, everything has come at once. Now, that seems to challenge at least our scientific way of understanding. No, how can things be at once? It takes time. Then one way Vedantic thinkers have tried to understand this whole idea about creation is that it's possible for things to come all at once, along with the idea that they have not come at once. So things come at once, but with the idea that they have come over time. Now, the example is clearly, think about it this way. So now you have a nice, good, delicious dinner one day, and then you go to sleep. Maybe, sometimes very few people fall asleep immediately after lying on their bed. But let's say you went to go to sleep around 10:30, and by 11 o'clock, you're in bed, you're completely asleep. And then exactly at 11, you start dreaming. And say 5 minutes past 11, you're 5 minutes into your dream. And then in your dream, you see your grandfather, and then you meet him. There is a river flowing by, and there is a mountain behind, and all of that. Now, in the dream, we don't know dream is a dream. I mean, if we know it's a dream, then we have already woken up. So in the dream, we don't know it's a dream. The dream has been around only for 5 minutes. The dream world was created 5 minutes ago. Now, the dream world that we created, did it come to start with Big Bang, gradually evolving? No, just boom, it just came. So if I meet my grandfather in my dream, my grandfather is 5 minutes old, 5 minutes of age, and I'm 5 minutes of age. The mountain, the rivers, all are 5 minutes old. But in the dream, it just feels like, oh, this mountain has been here for a long time. My grandfather is older than me. Although all were created at the same moment, the moment my dream began. So that's the analogy given in these texts to show how it's possible for everything to come at once. And I think the reason for that is we somehow, the reason it gets confusing is that we think time is a kind of a constant, that it's always been there. But if time itself is a part of creation, then we really even can't ask when did it start. Any when questioning is possible, assuming the presence of time. So anyway, so God can be seen as the one from whom this whole thing has come, on whom it rests, and whom it returns. These texts say that everyone is free to think of God as with form, with qualities, with form, without qualities, without form, without quality. Now, one interesting thing about this is that there is a tendency among people to somehow think that thinking of God as formless is somehow higher or better than thinking about God as with form. With form and with quality is like a little childish way. It's kind of infants do that. But those who are evolved think of God as formless, as beyond, which is nonsense, really. Because in my mind, at least, nonsense is probably a too strong a word, but that's how I tend to see it. It's like this. To think of God as formless, even to think of something as formless, is really affirming the presence of form. Because what are we denying? If form doesn't exist at all, then why even do we need to think of it as formless? So it's so much easier to think that these are ways we think about God. One way of thinking about God is the idea that God is beyond form or beyond quality. The other is God has form, quality. But these are all ideas. Now, the idea is always different from a reality. It's like a mango. The, uh, the idea of a mango, and people who love mango, even the idea of a mango is like, mango, and if they would like to eat it. But if you want to eat it, you need a real mango. We cannot eat the idea of a mango. We can only eat a real mango. And so the idea of a mango is different from mango itself. And that's true with all ideas. So right now we're just juggling with ideas about God. God with form, God without form, God blah, blah, blah. But God, the reality of God, cannot be labeled into just form or formless or anything. The reality always transcends any description of it. And so long as we recognize that God is who God is, but for some people, that same reality might be seen, their mind might think of it with form, without form, and so on. So this is one thing to remember in the path of Bhakti Yoga, not to create a hierarchy with form, without form. There is no hierarchy. There are just different ways of thinking about the divine. So these are some of the thoughts regarding God, some of the ideas regarding love. Definitions of bhakti, there are many, many definitions. Many people have given in many different ways, and all of them have something to teach us. And you can, nowadays, even if you just put on a Google, define bhakti, you'll find lots of different ways of thinking about it. Now, one of the ways that Swamiji mentions in his Bhakti Yoga books is about that the intensity with which, if there is something in life that we love most intensely, and we know that love, if it's true love, it's effortless. We don't have to like make an effort to love. Then there is no fun in that. And love is something that happens. Love is not something that can be artificially generated. It's something that just happens. And so one of the ways bhakti gets defined is that a worldly person, the kind of intense, effortless love that a worldly person has for the world, if I can have that same intensity, that same spontaneity, and love the divine, in whichever way I'm able to imagine and think of the divine, then that would be bhakti. So a one-pointed giving of oneself. Love is a form of giving. It's self-giving. It's not a form of receiving. And one of the ways, when we think about God loves us, what does that even mean? That God loves me? And because we use language and we think about it only in human terms, so we know about, well, when I love somebody, how I feel. So God loves me and God feels in that way. That's clearly a very human way to think about love. But if you think about love as primarily a giving of the self, it's self-giving. And so philosophically, God's love gets expressed in this creation. There is this very ancient hymn in the Rig Veda called the Purusha Sukta. So it's even physically thinking of this infinite cosmic person who gives of oneself. In fact, this whole creation seems to have come from the different limbs of that one infinite being. And so that's complete self-giving of the self. So if we think of love that way, then my love for God, my bhakti toward God would mean how much of myself I am able to give to God. And that would be a question that every devotee have to ask themselves. That we have many goals in life. There are a lot of things we have that these are the things I would like to achieve. These are the things I would like to do. But we also have priorities in our life. We know that we cannot be in two places at the same time, although Jeff is now technically in Chicago and Pittsburgh at the same time. But we know at any given time, given moment, we can do only one thing. And so there will be situations in life, and this happens all the time in our lives, that we are called upon to do things, but sometimes the time is limited and I'm expected to do two things. And clearly we cannot do two things at the same time. Then we make a choice. Oh, this is what I'm going to do. And if I have time, I'll do that other thing. And usually we choose that which is more urgent, more important, something that can wait, can be done later on. And so we prioritize things in life. And so if we prioritize things in our lives, the things that are important to me, things that I need to do, we can do that mentally. But if it helps you, you can make a list on a piece of paper. Don't show that paper to anybody, but make a list for yourself that these are the things important to me. And then it's a kind of a thought experiment or just an experiment on paper. These are the things that are important. And then you try to prioritize them. Among this list of things that are important to me, which is the most important, which is the second most important, which is the third most, the fourth most. And one would expect, if we are devotees, that God is somewhere on that list. Now, at what number God is? And that would be one way to see, at least in my mind, how important God is to me. And clearly, the idea is that in that highest state of bhakti, God would keep on rising high up on that list. And at some point in our life, God will be the topmost priority. In other words, nothing in my life will be more important to me than God. So if your favorite, think about it this way. Just to kind of indulge into this a little bit more. Let's say your favorite team is playing. There's a game going on, your favorite team is playing. And that's the time you generally sit and pray and meditate. What would we do? Now, our normal tendency would be, oh, this is the game. You don't have that game every day. So today I can kind of postpone my meditation by half an hour, 1 hour, and look at the game, and then I can meditate. In itself, nothing terribly wrong about it. But it also means that a bhakta asks, has my daily prayer and meditation become one of the chores to be completed that I have? There are things we do every day. We have breakfast, lunch, dinner, we have different meals. There are things that need to be done. Among the things that we do every day is this daily japa now that I've kind of committed myself to it. I've got to do it, which is a problem, really, in a sense that um, there are some challenges that occur in our daily practice, and this is important for in the path of bhakti to keep it in our mind. And that is, among the challenges, two at least come to my mind immediately. The first is to think that, oh, I'm just, some people out of humility or modesty or like to think like, oh, I'm just a beginner in spiritual life, and it's going to take years and years, perhaps lives, before I realize God, before God is going to appear to me. And so if we sit for our daily prayer and meditation with that thing at the back of the mind, that is going to take a long time, which the implication is today when I pray, no, nothing much is going to happen today because it's going to take a long time. What will happen today? If I skip it for a day, if I delay it by a little bit, eh, if it's going to take now years and lives, maybe if I postpone it by an hour, what difference would it make? That's one danger. The second thing is, if we sit every day for our japa, for our prayer and meditation, with this firm hope and faith that maybe today is the day. Who said? I mean, how do I know it's going to take many years? For all we know, we might think we are beginners, but we don't know, we don't know ourselves. We don't know our spiritual practices may have begun a lot in our earlier lives. Maybe we spent some time watching our favorite team play in our previous birth, and so we had to be born again. And if I keep on doing it now, I have to be born again. So our journey may have begun long back. And the reason we keep on being born, the reason we are here now is somehow in my earlier births, I didn't take the process till the end. I somehow left it midway for whatever reason. It wasn't topmost on my priority list. And so that would be one way bhaktas might think, that if God is on the topmost list of priority, then nothing in life can be more important than that. Uh, Now, this is one question that often gets asked, so I better address it right away. Because sometimes you're like, oh, there is a person now who is in pain. Should I now, God is on top of the list, and so now I should just ignore that pain of somebody and meditate? Obviously, come on, that's not true. You know that. Because at that time, my first and foremost thing is to help someone in need. Because God is found where the I is absent, the ego is absent. Sometimes spiritual people can become extremely egoistic. It'll become all about themselves. It's all about my moksha, my enlightenment. And then we might then ignore what needs to be done. And that not taking us near God, that's taking us away from God. So that's kind of obvious, but sometimes just for argument's sake, sometimes people do bring that up. Mm. So these are some of the thoughts that have been on my mind about, so we need in the path of bhakti, we need to have some clarity, even if it's not like a total clarity, but at least some thought should have been given. So, what does love mean? And what role does it play in my life? Do I really love God? Do I really want God? Clearly. And then every time we think of God, what is my idea of God? Now, don't ever think that what idea of God that any of us might have is like the final understanding. It's never final. Um, it's also, I mean, there are two things. One thing is there are lots of books which describe different ways of thinking of the divine, and nowadays the blessing and the curse is the easy accessibility of information. And now with AI and of course the internet which came, and so it's not too difficult to find what people think about any subject. But sometimes knowing, having a lot of information which is unprocessed can be more a problem. It's better to know less and have it processed. It's like eating a lot and not able to digest it. It's better to eat a little and digest it well. That's what will nourish us. That's what will strengthen us. And so I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
Too much information.
Before that? Yes. There's something I wanted to say, and I just lost my train of thought. Mm. Sometimes it happens when you're saying something and you take a detour and go somewhere, and it's like, good. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's the one. Thank you. I appreciate it. You're paying close attention. That's good. So never, none of us should think that the way I think about God is the way. Because yes, the one way of we get to know the ways of thinking of God through texts and through all this information, etc. But sometimes it is good to just keep that aside for a moment. That can be helpful. It can also be confusing. But also then just ask, aside from everything that you have read and studied, who is God to me? Is God simply an idea or a feeling? Or who is God? And the reason I say that is that how we think of God tells us not so much about God, but tells us more about ourselves. Because when we're dealing with ideas about God, is more about our projections, about how we think God is, how we would want God to be. Why is God almost always usually think about as a loving presence? We want love. We want to be loved. That's a human need. And so when we think of God, of course, we think of someone who is all loving. We feel vulnerable. We feel helpless. This in the larger, no matter how we think about ourselves, in a larger picture, every one of us is a nobody. We are nobodies. Um, if we die, maybe some close few family and friends might remember us for a few days. Then everybody says life has to go on and everybody is busy. Great incarnations have come, prophets have come, saviors have come, and the world still goes on. We don't miss them. What is about missing any of us? So none of us is that important. It's how we think of God is therefore a reflection of ourselves. Because we feel this vulnerable, so we want a protective presence, and therefore God is the one who protects us, who takes care of us. Everything that our needs get projected into some father figure, mother figure. Now, does that mean God is simply a projection? Of course not. But right now, when I see God, I'm really seeing God as a fulfiller of my present needs. I see God as I am and as I would want God to be, or someone in my presence to be. I say all this because sometimes we read in books, oh, God is beyond form, God is infinite, pure consciousness. It sounds wonderful. But only kind of we just think and say, okay, God is infinite, pure consciousness. What does it even mean? Just because the words kind of make us feel good doesn't really mean it doesn't mean much. When you try to kind of put our like try to grasp it, it just escapes. And so they often say that people think of God with qualities and attributes because we know what qualities are. We see God, it's easier to see God the way we see ourselves. In our own little way, it may be imperfect, but in our own little way, we know what it means to love. We know what it means to help someone. We know what it is mean to protect someone who are weaker than us. These are parts of our experience. And therefore, it's possible for me to think of God as someone who loves, who protects, who guides, because it's a part of my experience. Now, because forms is what that we deal with from the moment we are born, from the moment we wake up in the morning, it just we deal so many different forms. And so forms are a part of my experience. It may be possible for many people then to ascribe form to the divine. And so that becomes easier to some people because I have a form, my divine. Even people who think of God as formless, they still need something for the mind to see. There is this in southern India, there is one Shiva temple. Hmm? Chidam, that's it. Good, thank you. So in Chidambaram, so Chit is actually consciousness. And so in fact, there are 5 temples in the south with the 5 prime elements: space, air, fire or light, water, and earth. And so they have 5 Shiva temples where the Shivalinga is said to be made with these 5 primal elements. And so clearly it's a little bit easy to made of earth. Water, there is a kind of like a fountain-like thing. It's easier to kind of do it in a material form and so on. How do you have a Shivalinga which is made of space? And that's it, that Chidambaram temple, there is a Shivalinga, symbol of Shiva, but it's made of space. And so there is this kind of one dark room, and everybody like wants to see it. It's made of space. So you are really trying to see something that cannot be seen with this eyes and can be very frustrating because you want to see. And so what they have done is then they have these from the ceiling, they suspended some gold bilva leaves, which are sacred to Shiva. And so there is something to see. You're not seeing the Shiva made of space. You're not seeing the Chidambaram, but you're really seeing the Bilvali. So at least seeing something more tangible, then you can kind of visualize, oh, that may be where it is. Now, is that simply our imagination? No. Great devotees of Shiva have gone there. And in that transcendent stage, they have been able to see. But for most of us, we don't see anything. Now, I mention all this because the challenge even to think of God as the formless and infinite, God will remain simply an idea. As long as I think the futility of clinging to my own form, seeing my form as real, and thinking of God as formless, it's never going to work. And that's why I said, whatever way we think of God now, hold on to it. At least that's an authentic way my mind in my present state of evolution thinks of God. And that is so much more helpful than just reading about God in some book and then just trying, well, that's how God is, and that's how I must see. So just see it. Right now, this is the most natural way my mind thinks of God. But if my love is evolves, deepens, strengthens, my bhakti becomes stronger, my surrender becomes stronger, then I evolve. And when I evolve, I change. And when I change, the way I think of God also changes. In Swami Vivekananda's gave a talk, it's included in book on Dhyana Yoga, called The Evolution of the Concept of God. And in fact, there is a book written by, you remember his name, Robert Wright? He's a, uh, he's a, he's here from actually Pennsylvania. He taught in UPenn, I think, for a while. The book is titled Evolution of God. It's a fascinating book. If you get a chance, read it. It's not a new book, maybe some years ago. And evolution of God seems like, what? It's a world that evolves. God doesn't evolve. So what is really, it's a kind of a provocative title a little bit, but what he really means by that is, it's the idea of God that evolves. And that's essentially decades before, Swami Vivekananda actually already gave a talk on that subject, evolution of the concept of God. So God will not change. God is who God is. But my way of thinking of God will change, but that will change to the extent I change. Otherwise, me clinging on to my form and just talking endlessly about the formless, that's all it'll be, just talk. It won't change me in any substantive way. In order for my idea of God to change, I have got to change. So these are some of the things we need to keep in mind. For a bhakta, for a devotee, we have to find how much we have changed. It's not a way of, sometimes people try to compare their devotion by how many visions I had, or how many times I have read a certain book, or how many different ways, or how many festivals I observed, and how much I meditate, and all of that. But none of that really matters. Ultimately, how much have I changed? I changed for the better. Change can occur both ways. So if we can look back at our life and say, how was I as a person, say 5 years ago or 2 years ago, just take any time frame, and how I am as a person now. Do I feel I'm a better person now than what I was 5 years ago? And if I feel that I am better, then there is something I may be doing right. And sometimes it may not be just one way or the other. And maybe we might discover that in some respects, I'm better now than what I was 5 years ago. In some respect, I was better then than I am now. But this kind of an comparing ourselves with ourselves is important, because then I know what I should do. Sometimes people what shall I do? Spiritual life. Well, just compare yourself as you are now with what you were 2 years, 5 years ago. Where you find that you have improved, you are a better person now, then keep on hold on to that. That's your strength. Maintain your strength. But in some respects, if I find that I was better then than now, then I need to make some changes to my life. That's the way we will see some real change. So the path of bhakti is not just path about just reading books or listening to lectures. but it's a real transformation. So these are some of the thoughts I thought I'll share with you today. One final thought is about, I began by saying people tend to think that somehow knowledge is somehow higher than love, and path of jnana is somehow higher than bhakti. Uh, there's a piece, I think, in yesterday's New York Times, an op-ed piece by David Brooks, I think. Did you read that? Yeah, so among the things he says, take a look if you have access to it. That generally that not much thought has been given in the Western world about the power of emotions. That there's been such glorification of rational way of thinking, reasoning, logic, as if somehow that's the thing that gives us. And feelings, emotions are kind of looked upon as you can't trust them and so on. And then this piece points out that in more recent years, they have paid greater attention to emotions and feelings, and oftentimes find that that is a much more powerful force within us than people are willing to admit. That and this is so true. Most of the decisions we take in life, even people who believe like, oh, I'm a very rational person, I weigh all the pros and cons, and then only I decide. Even such people, most of the decisions we make are done through our feeling, how we feel about something, how we emotions. And we kind of emotionally, we decide on something being right or something that I want to do. And after deciding that, then we apply logic and reasoning to arrive at that predetermined conclusion. And then we fool ourselves thinking, oh, I thought about it, everything. But the decision itself was done by so much by feelings. So considering how powerful that force is, the path of bhakti is really a way of understanding that force within us, of uncontrolled feelings and emotions, which are not under any restraint, not discipline. We don't know where it will go. It's like you have a car which can go at 150 miles per hour. And while it can take you to the destination very quickly, but you have no control over it. Then it can just as well take me somewhere else. And so feelings are like that. It's a power. And so bhakti, the path of bhakti primarily, even before we can direct our feelings and emotions toward God, is to first bring them under control, bring them under restraint. So each of these yogas can be seen as primarily a method of purification. So the path of bhakti yoga helps us to purify our emotions and feelings, because only when they are purified can then we don't even need to then direct them toward God. Once they are purified, that's where they'll go. They cannot go anywhere else. Similarly, the path of jnana yoga is a purification of the power of reason. Reason is a great instrument. But again, if it's not controlled, it's possible. Even people who have done the most terrible things in this life, if you ask them, they had certain reasoning involved. It is possible to do horrible things and find some justification for doing them. So reason is a great tool, but again, which way we use it. So jnana yoga helps to purify the power of reasoning. Bhakti yoga, the power of feelings. And Raja yoga and Karma yoga, the power of the willpower. And that's why it's good to have a place in our lives for all of these different ways of approaching the divine. Because ultimately, we want our minds to be strong. with disciplined power of thinking, disciplined power of feeling, and disciplined willpower. So we will stop here today. And anything else we do? Do we? Is there time for maybe just if you have any one question? Yes.
But my question is, how does one say that, like, we do meditation, we do a japa, but how can one feel closer to God? If, yeah, that's basically the question. Yeah.
It's a good question. Well, one way to think about it is what things I'm closer to already in my life, and why I'm close to things I'm already close to. I mean, clearly, there are things in my life I'm close to. And then we might ask, why am I close to those things? What is it that they do for me? And what is it that they don't do for me? And then we can think about what does being close to God mean? What will that do for me? Because sometimes we often do things which are in our best self-interest. And so even from a purely utilitarian standpoint, we might discover that being close to God can give me a lot more than being close to anything else in life can give me. So sometimes recognizing what I get by that and what I'm losing by not doing that can be very helpful in redirecting and reorganizing our priorities. But that's a kind of a very analytical way to do it. And the second way would be just pray. If pray, if I'm not feeling close to God yet, but if I truly believe that there is God who I would want to be close to, then that could be my prayer. Lord, I want to be close to you, and I don't feel close. And if that prayer comes from the heart, there will be. Even we don't find any way, God always finds a way. So it's a path of prayer, it's a path of analysis. We just have to try it that way. Okay. Okay. I said one question, so now I'm revising mine. Okay. 2, 3. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, great.
Which is
Hmm.
non-taxing, hopefully, but it's common because you brought something up about the concept of time. And one of my favorite quotes is, when asked the Buddha, what is the greatest mistake we make? The Buddha replies, the greatest mistake we make is that we think we have time.
Yeah.
It's an interesting idea that
That's
we
true.
have time. You brought up time quite a bit, so I just wanted to.
No, thank you. Yeah, that's true. That's true. In fact, Swami Vivekananda once said, time is but the method of our thinking. We are the eternal present tense. And so, yeah, a lot to think about time. In fact, there's another one text, I think it's 12th or 13th century text written by a poet saint named Bhartrhari. And then he says, because normally people speak about time that is passing, and he in that text points out and says, no, time doesn't pass, it's we who pass. Time just is. Yeah. You wanted to say something? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted a comment about the you mentioned about words and like images. So I was thinking that the scriptures are passed through like books, at least in the Western world. And so what we hear, we typically hear words or we conceptualize words. So even if we say that God is formless, we have some mental image of formlessness.
Form of the formless.
Formlessness. So we are kind of like engaging two senses. One is like, I mean, the speech and hearing. But in our, I think, Indian or the Eastern tradition is with images, and you can convey the same information with kind of images and with different deities. So we are engaging the sight as such, and even I think like within our the Vedas and everything are through speech. So maybe it has been given less importance. Bhakti, is that is it because of
No, I don't know. I think it's not that everybody gives it less important, but there is a kind of a popular idea. But then if you ask some bhaktas, they will strongly contest that. And yeah, so this is just a kind of a general comment. Yeah.
There's the concept of purification, even sometimes it is retreat.
Concept of?
Purification, what does it mean? No.
Yeah. Maybe if you can just remind me tomorrow, then I can speak something on it because it's a little bit dark. Okay, so we will stop here today, and then tomorrow we will pick up some of these threads and then also take a look at that Navadha Bhakti tomorrow. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhur Muhu.